All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and for those of you joining us here live and in person in the theater here at the Museum of Glass. Today's December 17th? And this is our regular monthly series that we do here, interview and performances, always on the third Sunday of every month. And today we have the very special treat, the honor, as usual, of having the wonderful drummer and percussionist and musician and band leader and world traveler, Jeff Busch. Jeff, thank you for joining us again.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and looking forward to playing some jazz with you a little later too.
Yeah, and we haven't even discussed what we're going to be playing today. So
actually, it was we just had a great little warm up with your daughter, who's a swing and piano player and singer.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah, what great rhythm.
Yes. Well, now this is our second interview that we've done. So today, I haven't really given much thought to questions. This is going to go all over the place. So if any of our listeners, if you have questions for myself or for Jeff, probably the last 15 minutes or so of the interview here, we'll open things up to ask questions. But if you have questions and you're watching online, feel free to put things in the comments, and we will definitely get to them here towards the end. And as I mentioned, this is our second interview with Jeff, so if you want to learn more about his musical upbringing and influences and that kind of stuff, feel free to, you can find that on YouTube. And at this point, we have over 2 years of backlogged videos and information, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, please feel free to chime in and ask questions. And also, before I get started, we should definitely thank our sponsors, and of course, that's the Museum of Glass, KNKX, Ted Brown Music, it's Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray, Titus Will Cars, and I believe that's it. Oh, and BCRA Design. So thank you for your support, and thank you for watching, because that helps make this possible as well. So, Jeff, for musicians around the area but maybe a lot of people don't, you're one of the well-known and most sought-after drummers and percussionists, particularly when it pertains to Latin music, Brazilian music, Cuban music here in the Pacific Northwest. For people that don't have a lot of experience with that music and wanted to learn more about it, as many people do, where would be a good place for them to start? Where, if someone said, hey, I want to check out this music more and learn more about the history of it and people that really define this, and I know that's a massive topic of conversation, where would you as a musician and instructor direct them?
Well, I've learned a lot from locals in the community who are from both Brazil and from Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Peru, and just trying to expose myself to listening to those bands play, taking lessons from people when they come to town. For Cuban music, Julio Jauregui, who is a great pianist and composer and arranger.
And educator.
Who lives in Puyallup and plays in Seattle a lot. I've known him since the late 90s. I've also known Jovino Santos Neto from Brazil. And I've also learned a lot more recently from Marina Albedo from Spain, who also lived in Cuba. So just trying to expose yourself and listen to those players, ask them things, learn from them, and put yourself in situations where you can go out to places like the Sea Monster or the Century Ballroom, where there's regular Cuban music. Or I've also learned a lot from Marco Carvalho, who's Marco de Carvalho, from a guitarist from Rio. When I play with him, it's probably the quietest. He tends to play a lot of the music more quietly and slower than most Latin jazz ensembles would play Brazilian music or Cuban music, but his knowledge of the composers, the lyricists, the poets, really, it's an incredible catalog of work he's done. So just kind of being around those people, but there's also opportunities to go and study in Brazil. I've also learned a lot from Adriana Giordano and also from Gabe Hall Rodriguez and Jamie Mashler, who are very steeped in the northeastern Brazilian music tradition of forró, which is got a different instrumentation. There's usually sanfonas, accordions, percussion with the handheld tambourine, the pandeiro, the triangle, the zabumba bass drum, and just trying to learn about some of these popular regional musics and also their connection to American jazz. There's there's a lot of crossover between those styles and what you hear in the Caribbean, what you hear in New Orleans, second line music, and what you hear in jazz, just the syncopation of the tresillo, the 1, 2, empty, oh, 1, 2, empty. That's really a universal pulse. It's a 1-bar phrase, and it's the first, it's half of a clave phrase that you might hear in certain forms of Cuban or Brazilian or West African music. But anyway, just kind of like, if you get a chance to go to any of these places and just hang out and listen to music, study with people. I had the chance of studying in Brazil for about 7 months, and since then I've played a lot with Brazilians in Seattle. But it was like a life-changing education, really. So I'd like to do that in Cuba at some point too. There's an organization called Plaza Cuba, which I've considered going and studying for a week or two, and Marina Albero studied there, I think, at the conservatory for like 3 years when she was 15. So, and there's just so much great information on the internet too. Great players from all over the world that you can watch and study with. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah,
It's never ending.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. Well, let me back up a little bit. I mean, as musicians or as listeners, we are very blessed here in the Pacific Northwest because we have Seattle, we've got Portland, we've got Vancouver, BC, and the surrounding cities. I mean, Tacoma, Olympia, and I know that there's a lot of folks that are huge fans of Shoro music in Olympia, and they get out and play. And but if you don't live near those places, I guess that's where my original question. I mean, all the information you said was great. Yes, 100%. But if you're not near those places and you can't check them out, and let's say maybe your only access would be, without driving hours and hours, would be the internet, what are some artists that you would recommend or sites that maybe teach that you would recommend to people to check out and say, this is excellent information to absorb?
Well, there's certain composers worth checking out. Pixinguinha was a great saxophone and flautist composer in Brazil, and his name is spelled Pixinguinh, Pixinguinha. That was his nickname, but he's a very influential composer of choro music and probably other genres as well, maybe samba canção and machixe, some other styles. Ernesto Nazaré was a great, looks like Nazareth, his last name, Ernesto Nazaré, was one of my favorite choro composers. But a lot of times when you look at his music, it actually says like Brazilian tango. But he wrote a really beautiful piece. My favorite, probably one of my favorite pieces, is called Odeon. And but there's just so many great players. There's another contemporary mandolin player named Jacob do Bandolim. I meant to say Hamilton de Holanda, but Jacob do Bandolim is another founder of choro music, who's no longer alive, but his tradition has been passed on. So those are a few names that come to mind. Then there's people like Hermeto Pascoal, who just turned 87 years old, who was here in Seattle with his band, and he does a real interesting blend of a lot of these different styles, but in a jazz context, and his scope of musical expression is really, he's constantly trying to think outside the box, and it really shows when you listen and study some of his music. I think of him kind of like Picasso in a way, where he did so many different styles and incorporated elements of choro, samba, northeastern rhythms like baião or coco or chachado or xochi, as well as samba, and just making sounds, exploring the sounds of nature, of animals, the cadences that people speak. There's some really fascinating videos of Hermeto Pascoal and his band with Jovino, who was a member of that band for about 15 years. One of my favorites is where they, I think they were commissioned to create music for the preservation, as I recall, of a national park or something in Brazil. But Hermeto takes his band into this park, and he is very spontaneous in his creative output. So he'll just go into an environment and look around and listen, smell, whatever it is, and he'll react to it. And in this video, he's in a river. He gives some of the band members bottles with different amounts of water and pitches, and he comes up with an ostinato that they play, and then he improvises over another one where they're playing the surface of the water, and he did things with factory workers in a flour mill where there's the rhythmic sound of the machinery in the mill, and he created music in that environment. And he also was deep in this cave where they had headlamps and there were stalactites hanging down, and they played those. And so it was just really, really interesting. And I remember recording once with Jovino where we had done, some of his original music, but in one section of the song, he wanted me to go in and just play the sounds of these rocks in I think we had him in like a cup, but he didn't want me to listen to the music. He just wanted this sound to be in there. And I just remember thinking, that's a really interesting concept of just, let's insert some sounds. Let's, and also the sound of the human voice. A lot of times in North America, jazz musicians are less inclined to dance or to vocalize or to play percussion. Whereas if you go to probably New Orleans and the Caribbean and South America, it's very common for people to know the dance steps to the music they play and to know some accompanying percussion parts. And a lot of them sing just because it's fun and because it's a way to express. And you don't have to be a singer or even a professional musician to enjoy music. A lot of times there's kind of a disconnect in our culture, I find.
It's built in as like part of the culture. I mean, that's part of from where they come from. That's part of everyday life, correct?
Yeah. And I just remember being in Brazil and how much people who, didn't have a lot in their lives financially, materially, had jobs to go to, but after work, that release of social dance, singing, playing music was a regular part of their thing. It wasn't just something they did every now and then. It was like, let's go out and express ourselves and feel the energy and rejuvenation of that experience. And actually, I just had a really interesting experience with some colleagues from the Jazz Night School, and we were working. It was a workshop called Leadership Through Music, and we were working with 30. I think these people were studying different aspects of aeronautical engineering, but we were doing music with them, and they didn't speak any English. A few of them spoke a little bit, but they were translators. So these 30 people from China were there, but it was amazing how music brought out so much humor and connectedness, and so it was just really fun. And I just remember thinking, wow, it'd be fantastic to just be able to hang with these people and talk to them more directly. But the music was the link, and it was really powerful, and we all had a great time.
Very cool. Very cool. I want to do an aside and kind of go a different direction for a minute, and we can come back to this. And I can't remember if I was talking with you about this or it was Jovino. It was one of you two. But basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, choral music is kind of akin. Choral music in Brazil is kind of like jazz to America. Like the legacy and the history of that, how it kind of has come up over the years, and that's more uniquely their style that's from that region of the world. Your thoughts on this? Weigh in on this.
Yeah, please. I mean, it's something that's was evolving alongside or evolving in their culture the way that early field music, gospel music, blues, and jazz were evolving here. And a lot of those melodies written in the early 1900s and continuing, the choral music, in some ways it could sort of parallel, early jazz or Dixieland music, where there's, it's instrumental and there's a lot of emphasis on harmony and then, you know, from that, other forms of music regionally have sprung up. But choro really has, I think, in the last 20 years, kind of had a revival of just appreciation amongst a lot of younger people. It's very challenging technically to play. You know, it's typically played on clarinet or flute or saxophone or mandolin. You know, oftentimes there's a guitarist and then a 7-string guitar playing beautiful bass counterpoint, and the style of the percussion tends to be more handheld percussion. But you also see that music influencing jazz ensembles, and that's one of the things. You know, there's very traditional choro ensembles and gatherings. That was the other thing that I really remember about Brazil was the just within each neighborhood opportunities to go and hang with local musicians, and it wasn't really a gig, it was just a hang, you know. And so over the course of like 8 p.m. until maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, the music was just nonstop with different people dropping in, some of the elders showing the younger guys the harmony, stopping the music and re-going, you know, reestablishing the correct harmony, then starting up. And then sometimes there would be a couple having dinner. It's kind of an open air restaurant with no walls because it's very tropical. And I remember this one guy, he had a song he loved to sing, and he worked for one of the airline companies. He was a big, tall guy, and he would stand up and he'd sing acoustic, and he'd fill the entire restaurant. You know, all the music was acoustic, and people would get up and dance, and it was a great opportunity for someone like me to go and listen, but also be invited to participate because I had already studied some of the rhythms, and so they knew I could groove with them, you know. And so that was a really influential experience.
Speaking along those lines, kind of like with food, you go to one place, like you talk about barbecue in one area of the United States versus barbecue in another area. People can get very, very passionate about how it's supposed to be done. And again, I can't remember who I've had all these things kind of blur together, if I was talking with you about this or Jovino, whom it was, but in certain parts, like let's say we're talking about a particular rhythm like partito alto or something along those lines. If you go in one area and then you go to another village over, there might be subtle differences in how it's played or conceptualized. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, when I lived in Brazil, I asked people in the places I went to play samba for me. How do you play samba? And they would play a rhythm which I've since heard referred to as telecoleco, and it sounds like 1 2 1 2 ta 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 ta.
Hang on, I want you to do that one more time. Do it again.
So that's like a 2-bar pattern that would be played on the tamborim, but it might also be played on the drum set, or you know, there's comping patterns that you might hear on the guitar or the piano. All these different things influence the feel and the swing of the music. And but the other thing that's very interesting to me is the small instrument in Brazilian music called the tamborim, which is played in the schools of samba, but it's also played like in an ensemble. If I was playing just you and me playing a song on saxophone, I could play the tamborim. It's just this handheld drum. I could play it with my finger, I could play it with a stick, I could play it with a plastic stick. But there's a way in the samba schools that the tamborim is turned. And so the turn sounds like 1 2 1 2. So here's the tempo: 1 2 1 2. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. And so when they play in the samba schools, the tamborim, it looks like tamborim with an M. There'll be a section of tamborim players, and the arranger will will create a rhythmic accompaniment to a song. So they might play 1, 2, 1, 2, you know, and they'll do these things that fit with the melody of the song. But as a younger person, when I first came to Seattle, and I had just come from Brazil, I was teaching a class at the Experimental College, and I remember teaching that tambourine pattern, and excuse me, the light bulb just kind of came on in my head that the swing of the tambourine is really the thing that, to me, defines the unification of 16th notes and triplets, and that ability to ebb and flow between those two feels within a rhythm or within a song.
I want to stop here for a minute because this is very important. If people are watching this, I want you to pay attention, because I remember vividly I was playing with you guys one night. I think this was Capitol Cider years ago, and we were talking about this after the gig, and you took great you didn't have to do this, but you got a piece of paper and you very detailed wrote out all of this stuff for me and said, like, this is the thing to, like, really check out. So I want you to really elaborate on this now, and people watching, pay attention, please.
Well, yeah, so that tambourine pattern, 1, 2, ka 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 ka, to recreate that tambourine pattern without actually studying the technique of the tambourine. If you haven't learned it, one way to recreate it is to play on your legs, 3 against 2. So together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And on the left hand, I'm playing 1 and 2 and together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right. But if I just play the offbeat, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, the squeezing of those notes, doom, high, low. The surdo is playing high, low, high, low, high. So the rhythm can emphasize that triplet. It can also emphasize another rhythm that Jovino refers to as the fork, which is 1, 2, 1, 2, da 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 da, which is 16th notes. I'm playing the offbeat here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And now I'm playing the triplet. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 against 2. So that triplet sound is a very subtle thing, but it's also a great contributor to the swing of the music and the feel of the music. And once I kind of learned and that light switch went on, because a lot of times when I was first playing the style of music, I actually played in an all-percussion ensemble, a batucada band, when I lived in the UK, of all places, but there was some Brazilians there, and I remember seeing the snare drum part written as 16th notes, da 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 da. So that's one way it might be written, but you could also play that 1, 2, 1, 2 with a triplet feel, and it gives it a different feeling, and it's a very subtle component of the swing of the music. And I remember playing the first way, and you know, the director saying that's not really how it feels, you know. And so it's a really subtle thing, but once you understand that, you can decide to phrase that way and lean more toward the triplet, or you can phrase straighter depending on the groove of the band or the style of the music. And so it's kind of a really beautiful quality of the music.
It's funny you mention that. I talk to students about this all the time, in the way a lot of times how music could be notated versus how it feels. It's like technically you're playing the rhythm right. It just doesn't feel right, you know.
Yeah.
And I've talked with maybe I think Mark Ivester about this, and again, all this blurs together. But when you talk about swing, a lot of times when people are first introducing a swing feel, they say, well, you know, we see two. Sorry for the musical nerdery, but this is important for musicians out there. If you see 2/8 notes, we know that if we're in classical music or whatever, it's straight, 1 and they're equal, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. When we're swinging, it's a triplet. The downbeat is the first two parts of the triplet, and the upbeat is the last. So 1 triplet, 2 triplet becomes 1 and 2 and. However, that's what 66 and 33 roughly if we divide it. But some drummers, it's more 60-40 depending on who's interpreting it. So that's still they're swinging, but there's that little bit of pull or rhythmic difference, and it's all of a personal thing, and it all depends on how people have learned how to interpret that and internalize that. And you probably having to live in both worlds, you do a lot of jazz, you do a lot of funk and rock and just music in general. How do you think about that? I mean, if you're playing a quote-unquote jazz gig, I mean, is that kind of stuff going through your head, or you're just feeling it, probably listening to the rest of the people playing with you?
I think like probably most musicians take the vocabulary that they've cultivated throughout their lives, and in any given situation, you're just responding intuitively, instinctively, and reacting in ways that make the music feel better. And sometimes depending on the competency of the bass player and the piano player or the guitar player in the genre you're playing, it might be like focusing the lens to samba. You know, a lot of times in jazz, pianists will play a bossa nova tune, but they'll accompany more with a montuno feel. And it can still swing and sound groovy, but it's not like a Brazilian would play it. You know, it might be more based in partido alto or some of the tambourine patterns of samba when they accompany a jazz tune. So as a drummer, I just try and listen to how people are phrasing and then pull instinctively from what I've learned to try and make it swing the best I can. And that first rhythm, that tresillo rhythm, which it's sometimes referred to, or as the 3 side of clave, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, is a really great pattern to play in jazz context because it's a 1-bar pattern. It's a very driving, swinging pattern, and it's easy for people to lock in with, and it's a simpler rhythmic accompanying context than a 2-bar pattern, but it's still the pattern that in samba people will clap. You know, so there may be a beat that goes 1 2 1 2. So this will still be clapped by maybe people in a circle playing, singing a samba song, or it's still a relevant accompanying part. And it's also, that pattern is also more of the bass drum pattern in some of the northeastern styles, where the syncopation on the and of 2, 1 2 and 3 4, 1 2 and 3 4 is more characteristic of the foundation of the rhythm, you know. So yeah, it's very it's exciting to keep learning the subtle differences in some of these styles, and you know, living in Seattle, being from Pullman, you know, I've learned what I can, and but it can also help to like take lessons with people and kind of be refreshed on the subtleties that make one style different from another, and that kind of thing.
Well, and part of that too, I mean, for any style of music, part of it is having some sort of general knowledge about it, but also hearing it and experiencing people doing it very, very well. And that's why I'm saying we're blessed in this region to have many people like yourself that can do that, with other like-minded musicians that have a lot of experience with that. But if you don't live here, I mean, that's what I'm saying in terms of like resources, like maybe books or websites or musicians. If someone's saying, Jeff, you sound amazing, how do I begin? Like maybe they're a beginner drummer, they're just learning technique. Where would you steer them to learn how to be able to get? We're throwing out a lot of terminology too, and I'm aware of that. Some people have no idea. Like to them, you just say Latin music, and it stops with that, and that's maybe the length of their knowledge. So where would you point them to learn more about these things, other than private lessons? I mean, or going to those countries. I mean, that's obviously the best.
Yeah,
but
I just recently took a lesson with a great drummer from Brazil who lives in Iowa, and he does most of his teaching online. His name is, it looks like Isaac. It's, I think, would be pronounced Isaac Jamba. Instead of samba, it's Jamba. Isaac Jamba. He's a great drummer, very based in the rudiments, but his application and his technique on the drum set are beautiful to watch. And he came to Seattle and did a workshop recently. So I've watched and studied some with him online. I also love checking out the music of the great Cuban drummer Dafnis Prieto, who's also an incredible composer. He's come to Seattle as well, and he does. I don't know how much. I haven't necessarily. I've watched some of his workshops online. Teaching at Berkeley or other places. I don't know if he does regular lessons, but he does put out a lot of videos of performances, and in certain instances will break down an approach to playing montuno or timba or Mozambique rhythms, things like that. There's a great percussionist from Brazil, Leo Rodriguez, and he's a pandero player predominantly, but he also plays percussion. And so it looks like Leo Rodriguez, and I think his website is called Pratinellas, which are the little jingles on the tambourine. But he is one of the most advanced pandero players, and he also has an app that I was able to download called eBatuque. And in this app, there's a wide range of rhythms, and it's really kind of neat because you can isolate different instruments. You can speed the rhythm up, you can slow it down, and so you can learn what an Afro samba sounds like, a samba de roda, a machixe, a choro rhythm, a bossa nova rhythm, and he's continually adding to this. So there's a lot of really great information just to be transcribed, through listening to that. But people have different approaches, and it's not to say that like sometimes you'll come across a band or a musician who says that this is how I play this particular rhythm. And other times, kind of like jazz, there's different approaches people have. And so you kind of try and pull from different people and pull from things that really sound beautiful to you. Ultimately, when I'm playing these styles, I try not to think too much about just like, mostly it's like cooking, you're trying to put in, or like Roy Haynes, the great drummer Roy Haynes said, it's like you're on a horse, or it's like you're on a buggy with a horse. And when you're playing jazz, you're kind of holding those reins and you're pulling a little bit, pushing a little bit. It's similar. You could say the same about comping in bebop or comping in any of these styles. You pull from your experiences. Giovanni Hidalgo is another great percussionist who I love, and he's regarded as really one of the greatest in the world. A Puerto Rican who plays principally congas, but he can play anything really. And he just put out a very inspiring video. He sadly lost some of his fingers due to illness, but he's still playing and practicing. And he put out a very inspirational video just like a week ago. And he's showing people, look, I've lost these fingers on this hand and this hand, but I still love music and I still love practicing, and I'm going to adapt and keep going. And it was really inspirational. So if you ever get a chance to listen to Giovanni Hidalgo, He's in a lot of great videos. Another wonderful Cuban percussionist is Pedrito Martinez, who's an amazing singer and conga player. All-around percussionist, but principally congas. And his Tiny Desk concert is one of my favorites of all time. And he came to Seattle as well. But these people are really dedicated to their craft and just super inspirational.
Well, let's talk about speaking of that. I mean, I could say the same thing about you. I mean, you're in that echelon as well, and we're very blessed in this region to have great people such as yourself. But there's also, as you mentioned, here in Puyallup, Julio Jauregui and Marina Albero, Adriana Giordano. Who else? Jovino's here.
Jovino, Marco,
and all of these folks teach, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Gabe Hall Rodriguez and
Yes.
Jamie Mashler. Yeah, Gabe's a great accordion player and pianist in Brazilian genre, as well as jazz, but that's his love, is Brazilian music. And Jamie Mashler, he works with Jamie a lot, teaching accordion, studying in Brazil. They go to Brazil, and sometimes there's free camps in Brazil where you can go and study with different artists from around the country. You just have to get there, and you can hang out. But Brazilian culture and musicians, if you have an interest in their music and have studied it somewhat, they're very generous and very encouraging, and there's a lot of opportunity to just like hang and be invited to participate in things and learn, So that was my experience, and it's we're lucky to have those people in the city.
And you. I remember when I was in college at Cornish College of the Arts, I remember Jovino was the Latin ensemble teacher, and I was in the group, and he was gone, and you taught the classes. And I was very impressed with, number one, I mean, your playing is phenomenal, but your ability to communicate those ideas and show how to implement them. Because some teachers are teachers, but they're not necessarily great at conveying information, but you're quite good at that, I think, my opinion. Do you teach individual lessons?
I don't have regular students, but I do love teaching. I love teaching little kids as well as, any age really, people who are excited about learning. I do a lot of work in the libraries during the summer for kids, like infant through, usually that people that come to those are like infant through middle school. I recently did some teaching at Western up in Bellingham this past winter, as well as an artist in residency at UW, which was really exciting. And I've been working also with the Samba School in Olympia. And so sometimes people ask me to do things. My main work is just being an accompanist and a performer. And so I tend to not keep a regular teaching schedule, but if someone wants to get together and study, I'm always excited to do that too.
And how would someone get in touch with you? This is shameless self-promotion here. If they wanted to learn from your vast amounts of wisdom. Yeah,
I have a website which is jeffbusharts.com, and on there is my contact information and as well as samples of things that I've been involved with musically, as well as visual arts. I really love visual arts as well, and so I put that together in the last year or so, and that's one way to do it. So jeffbusharts.com.
Wonderful. I'm going to switch directions again and ask your opinion about this. I remember this is more towards the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a very, very strong Latin music scene here in the Northwest. And I remember, just off the top of my head, there was Latin Expression, which is the big band. There was Asinque. There was Nueva Era, Tumbao, Sonando. And there seemed to be a very large amount of clubs that supported that music on a regular basis. It seems to me, and again, this is just my opinion, I'm older now and have kids and I don't get out. I didn't get out before, but less now. That there seems to be, and I should add definitely Century Ballroom in there as well. It seems to me that there's less venues, or at least you don't hear about it as much as you used to. And I know you play a lot with all these different groups, or at least have friends and associated with that. Is that a fair assumption? Am I off base in saying that, or?
It does feel as though Well, some of those bands have dispersed, but a lot of the players are still around. There's a pretty thriving Latin music scene and salsa dance night that happens on Saturdays from 7 to 9:30 at the Sea Monster, and there's quite a rotation of bands that play there. There's also bands that play at Club Sur. I think there tends to be more national or international performers who come through Club Sur and maybe collaborate with local rhythm sections, as well as Century Ballroom has, I don't know how regularly they do live bands. I want to say maybe it's once a month or maybe it's once every season. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't played there in a little while, but I do know that they have swing and salsa dancing and maybe tango. There are some places, but yeah, we could definitely use, having more venues to play would be nice. It can sometimes be a hustle for people to create these opportunities, but there's still things happening, and we've unfortunately lost some venues due to COVID or due to Vito's was a great venue for local musicians in Seattle that sadly was destroyed from a fire, and but there are some venues that are still thriving, and hopefully, musicians are always looking for new opportunities, and I know there's some venues that are starting to do more music, but as far as Latin dance, it seems to me the Century Ballroom, the Club Sur, and Sea Monster are the main ones that I can think of.
Well, now, for musicians that are trying to learn this style of music and play, you've been in the house band for many, many years. I think before the show here, you said it's about 10 years. At Capitol Cider, you guys have been running a session, and it's not a jazz session. It is just, you call it a session, correct? Or what
Yeah, it's a jam session open to jazz, but any style of music. So we've had people from Spain play there. We've had opera singers perform there. We've had poets perform there. We've had blues singers, gospel singers, Caribbean steel pan players. And sometimes it's great, and other times it's someone coming up to perform for the first time with a band, So we try and make it welcoming and fun. As much as possible, and there's a house band. Right now there's the first Wednesday of the month, it's music led by Adriana Giordano, Brazilian music. And the second Wednesday is Elna Jordan, who's a great jazz, blues, soul singer, and she invites a lot of people from the swing dance community and the blues dance community out. So there's been a lot more emphasis on dancing in the opening set. The third Wednesday is Carlos Cascante from Costa Rica, who sings with Tumbao and the Spanish Harlem Orchestra. And then the fourth week tends to be open, so it can vary. But it has kind of turned into a hub where a lot of people like to come down and dance, and then we, just try and have a good time and make people feel welcome, and do our best to pair experienced players with non-experienced players. And so that's kind of my job. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and you just do your best. One of the things I kind of learned when I played drums for many years at the First AME Church, the oldest black church in Seattle, or in Washington State, on Capitol Hill on 14th and Pine. They had a great lesson that I learned was within that community, and they had many choirs from pretty much kindergarten through 5th grade. Then they had a high school choir. Then there was like a young adult choir, a middle-aged choir, an elder choir. But a lot of these choirs had great singers, but also some of them had people who couldn't carry a tune. But it was more about the community aspect of it, and I learned a lot from that experience. Just the importance of building community and the importance of expressing music together in a group and doing your best to help the people who struggle and featuring the people who are super talented. And sometimes they would feature people who aspired to be soloists but didn't necessarily have the natural aptitude to be soloists. But I remember sometimes people singing and not being able to carry a tune very well, and the audience, instead of booing them, they would encourage them, like, come on, you can do this, and that was the vibe. And that vibe is like a really important thing, because ultimately we want to have a good time, and sometimes, it swings and it happens, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's like, okay, we did our best and you did your best, and I hope and come back and go home and practice and come back and try it again,
Well, the environment, I've been to Capitol Cider many times over the years to either sit in or play with you guys, and it's always been a very positive environment. I've never been there where it's been a negative thing, and the music's always been great. And the nice thing about it, particularly, if we're talking about it through the lens of basically all the musicians there, you can play any style and it's going to be great. But if you want to do one of the Brazilian things or the Cuban things or whatever, there's yourself, there's Julio on piano, there's Dean Schmidt, a long time it was Eric Verlinde, Ernesto. All these folks are very, very talented and experienced in playing all these different styles, and it always feels good.
Yeah, Ernesto and Tor are the percussionists that alternate weekly, and then the house band. Dean and Julio and I have played together a long time, since the late 90s, and Julio comes from a real background of Afro-Cuban music, but he's also developing more and more repertoire in jazz, and he's also he's a great soloist and accompanist, so we do our best to try and make it happen, predominantly in jazz, blues, soul, Cuban and Brazilian music, but sometimes it's other things, and so we do our best to try and make it fun and swinging, and sometimes it's really beautiful, and other times it's a learning experience.
Well, I keep barraging with questions. Are there any questions from our listeners in the audience? Do we have any questions either live in the studio in the theater here or online? If not, I'll just keep barraging Jeff with questions. All right, I'll keep barraging Jeff. All right, cool. Well, can you talk about, again, so the people are clear as to what's going on with Wednesday nights. I know that there's been a shift with Capitol Cider, and things are still happening there, and they've been going on for 10 years, but there's been a shift in how the club is called. There's been new management or something. What's happening there?
Well, the club that was called Capitol Cider is now, if you look it up online, it's called Stir, which is spelled A and then a separate word, STIR. And so it says Stir, formerly Capitol Cider. They still have the Capitol Cider sign outside. And so half of the management or half of the business was sold to a new owner, and they've done some remodeling inside, and there's a nice area to dance, probably some small changes to the menu. They used to have shuffleboard in there, which they don't have anymore. There's more couches and some seating in that area, but it's essentially the same club, and it's on Wednesday nights. Thomas Marriott has a great jam session on Monday nights at the Royal Room, and also the Mo Jam Mondays at in Ballard happens on Monday. So we kind of thought, well, with those two things happening on Mondays after the pandemic, we thought maybe we should move to a Wednesday. So Vermilion also was a great jazz venue that Thomas started up, and that's now moved down to Pioneer Square, and that happens earlier in the evening from like 7 to 10, and then the Capitol Cider, the Stir Club, formerly Capitol Cider, starts at about 10 p.m. and goes till 2 a.m. So it's a late night hang, and if you go to something that Thomas does earlier, that's great to check out, and you can come by the cider bar later. It's been going for a while, and it's a fun hang.
And so, if people are looking it up online, would they Google? They would Google a Stir to
You
find
could,
the
you could probably
calendar?
you could probably Google that. I still have looked up Capitol Cider, and it still pops up. It just says a Stir, formerly Capitol Cider, but it's on Pike Street, 818 East Pike, I think. Yeah, right off of Broadway, and across from the QFC. So it's down in the basement. It's free, and they've got, a great menu and local ciders and other things if you want to explore beers and wines. They have that kind of stuff too.
The music's pretty good.
Yeah, we have a good time.
Right on. Well, aside from all of the stuff we're talking about right now, you're involved with lots of other projects, including Duende Libre. I think you guys just played down in Olympia, and the Wednesday night thing. What other projects are you currently playing with? Because you do a lot of sideman work with many groups.
Yeah, I've enjoyed playing with Duende Libre as a trio and as a quintet with Frank Anderson on vocals and Hava Morel. Frank's also a percussionist who studied a lot in Guinea, West Africa. So a lot of the songs we do with vocalists tend to be based on material, rhythms and songs and dances that Frank learned in his study with Famadou Konate, a great drummer and percussionist from Guinea. And so Frank studied with Famadou and other griots. Griots are kind of the leaders and storytellers of history of the culture, and so they will share songs and dances and rhythms that accompany different aspects of life, whether it's a celebration for a wedding or a work song or an initiation or a rite of passage. And so Frank is a real wealth of knowledge, and we've enjoyed doing some material that he's brought back to us. I'm still doing some playing with Jovino Santos Neto and his quintet. We're going to perform on the 23rd of December, which is next week, at the North City Bistro. And I also occasionally put together a project called Magic Circle, which I've invited, when I can, the great percussionist Paoli Mejias from Puerto Rico. He's also the conga player in the Santana band with Carlos Santana. And he and his wife live in Burien, so it's been a real exciting learning experience to play alongside somebody of that caliber. He's really regarded as one of the greatest conga players in the world. And so having him nearby and just trying to expose myself to people like that has been a great way to learn. And then coming and playing with you or playing with Marco G. Carvalho and Hans Teuber. I also was doing a lot of trio playing with Jeff Johnson and Tony Foster this past fall, which was a real great experience. They're both wonderful musicians, and just being an accompanist for whatever comes up.
Well, you have another, aside from the every Wednesday thing, there's another thing you mentioned. There's a monthly series at North City Bistro, a brunch that you're doing? Yeah,
there's an all-ages jam session that will start in January. It'll be the last Sunday of the month, and it will be from 11 a.m. to 1:30. And it's all ages, which is a great opportunity for people to bring their young kids. You should bring your kids and play if you're ever free. Your daughter had such great rhythm on the piano. And we've had some people who've brought like 2-year-olds and we'll give them some percussion to play alongside, Eric Verlinde and Jeff Johnson, and different singers and instrumentalists come out. So it's and they have a great brunch menu, and it's an earlier time of day for folks who might work during the week. So keep that in mind. The last Sundays of the month, starting in January at 11 a.m. It'll be the all-ages jazz brunch at North City Bistro.
Right on. All right. So we're getting close to the end here. Does anybody have any questions here live and in person or online? Any questions? Or I'll just keep barraging Jeff with questions. I'll do that. Okay, this is a big question. Feel free to tackle this however you want. With someone who's got a very well-rounded musician, but roots definitely in jazz and rock and heavily in Latin music, all the different areas, where do you see the future of jazz and Latin jazz going? I mean, do you feel that there's a large, I feel that there's a large interest in it, and it seems to be very, very popular, particularly because of the dancing element and the nightlife element. But in your experience, where do you see things going? Where are things headed?
You know, I think that component of music and dance and song is like a really natural form of human expression, and I think people are always going to love those outlets, and I think, you know, with the internet, accessibility to great players from around the world on your phone, there's going to be a continuation of influence and collaboration happening, and I think that's a beautiful thing. But I feel like even when we've had struggles, you know, when we've had economic downturns or unemployment or whatever's going on in the world that's stressful, that music and dance and song and the connectedness that comes from that is a real great form of medicine for people, you know, for performers and for audience members. So I think human beings will seek that out. You know, you can get together with people who don't speak your language, who don't come from your culture, and find connectedness. You know, when I played this past week, there were some people there from the Soviet Union. There were people there from South America. There were people there from Bothell, you know. So you get all these people coming together, and it's like, let's have a good time together. And that's one of the things. And I love the concept of playing with people. I love the concept of recording with people, interacting with people. I mean, the age of computers enables us to do things and collaborate with people from around the world, which is also beautiful. But there's nothing like getting together and jamming with your daughter on the piano and singing next to her, and like, okay, let's do this, you know. And so I think people are always going to want to find that connectedness.
Wonderful. Well, Jeff, it's as usual been a pleasure getting a chance to barrage you with questions again and pick your brain a little bit. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all of those that were able to join us live and in person, all 6 of you, and online as well. Again, this is something that we do on the 3rd Sunday of every month here at the Museum of Glass. We do this every single Sunday from different venues around Tacoma. Most of our programming is free and all ages. At this point, as I mentioned, there's over 2 years of backlog material of interviews and concerts and performances. So if you enjoy the work we're doing and you want to support it, feel free to make a donation. You can do that via Venmo or PayPal, or mailing a check, or doing it live and in person, but it helps keep this thing supported and all ages and free. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to do it. And we're going to take a very short break and then figure out what we're going to play. And we'll start the concert at 3 p.m. Thank you so much.
Kareem Candy, everybody. Thanks for all you do, Kareem. Thank you.